Hello and welcome to CMC. I'm Mindy Wright, a member of CMC's Board of Trustees and Senior Outreach Coordinator at Ohio State. It's really good to see you all here today. Today, the Columbus Metropolitan Club presents Sanctuary, a personal immigration story. For generations, the United States has been a beacon of hope and prosperity for those seeking refuge and a better way of life. From the earliest settlers to current political refugees, we are an immigration nation. It's confounding how quickly some forget how we got here, from where we came, and how immigration has contributed to who and what we are today. Today, we'll explore the saga of one family and hopefully learn more about why and how our nation is reacting so strongly to these issues. So won't you please help me welcome Pastor, Columbus Mennonite Church, Joel Miller, human rights activist Ruben Castilla Herrera, attorney, former executive director, Ohio Commission on Hispanic and Latino Affairs, Joseph Moss, and our host, journalist for the Ohio Public Radio, Joe Ingles. Go ahead, Joe. I give the podium to you.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be part of this discussion. And like many of you, I've read about it in the newspaper, and I've been intrigued by what I've been seeing. And so without taking up any more time, let's go ahead and cut to the chase here. And Ruben, I'm going to ask you, can you kind of give us a summary of Edith's situation and what's going on here?
Sure. First of all, I want you to say her name. Say that, Edith.
Edith
Espinal. Edith Espinal.
Edith Espinal.
I want to start there because we're talking about, first of all, a friend of mine, but we're talking about a mother, we're talking about a daughter, we're talking about a person who has children, a spouse, and a community member of Columbus, Ohio, long time. And so through all this, I want to make sure that we always remember we're talking about people here. And it's about sanctuary, but we're talking about a person with a name, Edith Espinal. We're talking about a person with a story. And we're talking about a person who has a life here in Columbus. So may that always be the central part of what we're talking about. But just real quick, I've been working on I don't know, what do we call it? Immigration justice, immigration reform. I think it's just working for the basic human justice of all people, right? And that's kind of what we've been doing through Central Ohio Worker Center, through other entities as well. But Edith specifically came to our attention probably maybe a little over 4 years ago when she was coming over back to the United States from Mexico with her son Brandao. On a rather high-profile case, and there were other people, Dream 30, or maybe it was a Dream 34, that there was 34 people that came over, from Mexican, that came over seeking asylum. And there were 3 from Columbus, actually. And Brandao, her son, and Edith, and a third person, Cesar, who unfortunately his case was not, he wasn't able to come back. So we organized to be able to bring them home. That was our hashtag. And so we worked very hard at that time to bring them home. And we with the national organizers down in the border, were able to make that happen. And I remember very specifically picking them up at now it's a John Glenn Airport, International Airport. And so 4 years ago, she re-entered as a citizen or a resident here in this city. And since then, she was given a case of asylum. So she was let in to seek asylum. And so as the case kind of went on her specifically, she got to the point to where in the Cincinnati or the Cleveland Immigration Court, it was denied, and it was appealed to the Sixth Circuit Court, and it was denied there, her asylum case as well. And so in the process, the check-ins, let's say pre-January 2017, if you will, it was a little bit different. It was difficult, but it was different, right? And so we had a little bit more of a relief in the sense that we could buy time a little bit easier, arguably. It was a different argument. But since this year, and I'll just say it, since Trump has become president, there's no sense in beating around. It's become much more difficult. And so she's had to check in the ICE and more regularly. It would start off monthly, then weekly, and then they started doing visits at their home, right? And that's crazy that happened. And so we knew that possibly it may end up in some kind of a deportation order. That was our biggest fear, all of us, I think. And that actually happened in August, and that's when, well, it happened at the same time where Edith went to a check-in. She's always complied and done what people say you should do, what you're supposed to do. She always has, right? And that does not always give you the results you want. And in that particular day, there was an ankle bracelet that was put on her, a monitor, which she's still wearing, and also she was given a deportation order. And when she came to our attention right afterwards, she met with us at my home, actually, and she herself looked at the option of sanctuary. And so that's when we had already started doing training on sanctuary to churches, and we were preparing the community and the faith community for that possibility. We didn't have a church at that moment, but sometimes a sense of urgency moves things faster. And so that's exactly what happened.
And then, Joel, that's where you come in,
Exactly,
because
yeah.
you have the church that took her in, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I could, I want to describe a scene to introduce our role. So in this scene, there's Latin music playing, and it's coming out of a cell phone. And this cell phone, the music's kind of muffled because the cell phone is strapped to the ankle of a woman who is sitting with her family on the front pew of a church she's never been in before. And this happened in our church. It was a Wednesday, and it was the second congregational meeting that we had we had one Sunday, then we had one Wednesday, and we had learned that Edith was seeking sanctuary the Thursday before that. So this all happened within a span of a week. And we were deciding whether we could be a sanctuary congregation, which would involve Edith living in our building. And Edith is basically a friend of a friend because of our connection with the immigrant advocate community here. And a week and a half before that, before we even knew about this, we had a 55-year anniversary. We missed our 50-year anniversary, so we made a big deal out of our 55-year anniversary. So you can always, if you miss something, you can always make it up later. And this is 2 days before we found out about Edith. And during that time, you tell stories about what the congregation has done. And one of the stories was that the congregation being involved in the sanctuary movement in the 1980s, which for us did not involve hosting someone, but just advocating for a Salvadoran woman who was moving to Columbus. And so I think having that story in our consciousness helped us as we made our decision with a very short process, which is very unusual on church time, to be able to make a decision that fast. But I think having that story in our minds and remembering who we have been as a congregation help form our commitment now.
So she's living in the church right now, and she's pretty much, has she exhausted all of her legal appeals, Joe?
Yes, from what we have heard from her counsel, and I'm not representing her, and I'm not an immigration attorney. I'm a criminal defense attorney, and was asked by Joel to consult with the congregation regarding the involvement of the church and the impact on that. But from what we have been able to ascertain, her legal recourses have in fact come to an end. And they asked her, that is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, asked her to purchase her own ticket for her own deportation. And then there was a drama here at the end as to whether she would present herself, not present herself, and so on. So she made the choice to come into our congregation. I attend Columbus Mennonite as well. And for us to meet this challenge together. So that is the background, at least as far as the legalities are concerned. However, let me pause here a moment. I don't know if we have any immigration attorneys in the audience today, but my experience with immigration law is that it's a fluid concept. It is not like my criminal cases where things are pretty much black and white. but that orders can be stayed, can be revisited, cases can be reopened based on a number of things, including ineffective assistance and other things. So the end is not always the end, Joe.
And the other thing that's important in that process is the community organizing around that, right? And so one thing that Edith decided, she decided she was going to go into the sanctuary, and she also decided that we would go public with this. And so there's a legal aspect, and then there's an organizing aspect that hopefully, in all best situations, work together are in communication. But the pressure that we apply, we've showed up, even before this became a high-profile case, we were showing up at Edith's ICE check-ins. We wanted ICE to know that there's people in the community that are concerned that will go there at 9 in the morning on a work day and show up. And so that kind of pressure that it can have some effect on exactly what Joe was saying. In fact, in some cases, that's all we have, right? Because we know one thing, ICE wants to deport people, without a fact. And so our job and what we do is show up and push ICE, defy, don't comply, those kind of things, push, in a nonviolent way, of course. And so that community pressure is important, and it's growing as well.
And the public nature of this ties to the punchline of my story that I forgot to tell, which is the reason why this thing was strapped to Edith's ankle. She has a GPS. One could call it a bracelet, but it's more of a shackle, a GPS ankle monitor on. And we don't know whether it is whether there's a microphone on it. And so when we were talking about sanctuary as a congregation, and she was in our church, this was if ICE was listening, this is what they were hearing. But it's not a secret. We're not hiding Edith. And of course, telling her story now, it's a very public story. But that monitor is part of the way that the border has moved around her body and is part of the reality of not just her life, but others in her similar situation.
I would like to follow up on something that Ruben mentioned actually already twice today, and that is the predicate, the reason why we're having to deal with these cases, unlike with the previous administration. Let's not forget that when Donald Trump came down that golden escalator in his building, the first thing that he mentioned was the criminality of the undocumented immigrant community, that Mexican immigrants were criminals, drug dealers, and rapists, something that he has never walked back. When Jeff Sessions was appointed Attorney General, he said he was going to work with Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Homeland Security to ensure that the worst of the worst would be targeted for deportation first. But in fact, what has happened is that they have gone after immigrations and customs, because I want to be very clear, Immigration and Customs Enforcement has gone after low-hanging fruit. They've gone after people that, as Ruben said, presented themselves to immigration authorities asking for protection and seeking asylum in the United States. And we are I know that Ruben and Joel join me in our concern that perhaps the DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, young people may be next in line. So that instead of going after the worst and the worst, because you know what, maybe there isn't such a thing, they go after who they can find. And that is what is going on. Statistics show, according to a study conducted by Austin Coker, also a member of our congregation who just got his PhD on this topic, the city of Columbus leads the nation in deportations based on nothing. In other words, based on no criminality, first in the nation.
And let me just point out, because I don't want to, I want to emphasize, and I don't want to necessarily take away from Edith where we started with her name, but that very system of deportation was set up by the previous president. And so what we've seen this president do is actually activate it to a different level. So the enemy, if you will, has always been there. And the primary motive, I said earlier, the primary motive of ICE has always been to deport people, at least in more recent history. So we've been fighting, trying to stop deportations for the last 8 years. And so those records in Franklin County are also from the last 8 years as well. And so it just didn't start. It's just a whole different level. And so be that as it may, we are where we're at. And so what is it that what can we do? And this is really, as an organizer, this is why I'm here. I love telling the story, but that's a very first important step, right? There's some things that I would like to talk about later on. Is what is it that we can do to be able to move this for justice for Edith? And it's like a concentric circle, right? There's layers of justice for not only for Edith, but other people in Central Ohio or other people in Ohio in this country. And how does that tie into the criminalization of black and brown people, period, right? There's even that. But focusing back on Edith, I think that there's some very important things that we can do right here and right now.
And that's where I kind of wanted to take the discussion. You know, what happens next in this scenario? Are we going to see ICE coming into the church and trying to get Edith? Are we going to see ICE going after those who are aiding her and helping her? What are we likely to see here? And what are your concerns for her son? That she has 3 sons, I understand. 2 are U.S. citizens, but 1 is not. So is there a concern? Oh, a daughter. Okay. So are you concerned for that child as well?
I think Edith has expressed some concern regarding one of the children who still has a pending case for the reason that you're implying, Joe. So that's I think, a great concern there. But you asked a very important question, and I did some research before the discussion here today as to what is the consensus regarding, number one, going against prior policy regarding forcibly breaking into the church, and that's how it's done, and for that matter, prosecuting the members of the congregation. The consensus is that we don't know. Look, in the course of a week, the narrative coming out of the White House and out of Washington generally changes several times. In the course of a day, oftentimes, it changes. So we don't really know. Now, there is a letter that was issued by the Department of Homeland Security saying that they were not going to act against, and by acting, I'm talking about actually breaking into the churches and retrieving people with deportation orders. That letter has not been rescinded, but there are rumors that, in fact, officially it will be rescinded. And there is a very short step from that event, foreseeable or not, and then the possibility of prosecutions against the congregations that have taken this unusual action.
Let me answer your question in a little different way, because you ask what happens next. And so part of, from my perspective, what happens next is that there are other congregations, there are other community people who have signed up to bring meals, who are donating money, there was a woman who, while the 3 of us were huddling at the church a bit yesterday, who knocked on the front door and brought a Domino's pizza, who had not called ahead of time, saying, I wanted to do something because this story is troubling to me. And so part of what happens next is enabling Edith to live a human life with her family while all these other things are going on. And this is not the story of one congregation doing this. It's really the story of a community protecting a mother and her family that wants to stay together, who has been denied her asylum claim from fleeing violence in her country of origin.
And other churches are actually looking at doing this as well, right?
Yeah.
That's right. That's another layer of it. Yep.
And so to that point, since this has happened, it's the first public case of sanctuary in Ohio. There was one that preceded it by a couple of weeks that is not public in a city up north. But since then, Dayton is close to bringing in someone in sanctuary. Cincinnati, there's someone in Cleveland as well. So it's a movement that's growing. And the irony about this is that by becoming public and by defying, if you will, this way through sanctuary, it brings a certain safety. to hopefully to the particular case and the particular person. So that's, but at the same time, the person becomes a target, right? And so it's like this. But what is unique about this is that these are people of faith that are ultimately doing the ultimate, what I think, civil disobedience. I've been arrested. I've been pepper sprayed before. But ultimately they're putting that at risk, right? And that is, I just, it's unimaginable for me. The other is we're here today. I mean, when would I be here? And let me just, I'm going to go ahead and, if you would stand, Brandao and Isidro are right here. Look at them. Stand, si se pueden, if you could stand. These are her sons, right? And the applause is appreciated, but we need more than that, right? And I'm just going to ask that because we have a tendency, because we care. And this is how we learn is please. This is not about offering sympathy. It's about what can I do, right? And so I want you to see their faces, and they're invited. When would we be here? And so that's the great thing about making this a case in this respect. We are here at the Metropolitan Club looking at the landscape of the city, and arguably the beautiful Scioto. Some might disagree. But the Scioto River, right? So aquí estamos.
You know, a lot of people, when they approach the idea of immigration and these kind of situations, they say, well, you know, why didn't she just go ahead and apply and get citizenship? That's one of the first questions, and the answer is not that simple, is it, Joe? It's
almost impossible. As a matter of fact, early on in our experience, we've had this wave of immigration. Columbus has had many waves of immigration, and I think those of you out there are probably the descendants of some of the earlier waves. But this wave started at about 1995, so we have quite a few years of that. And I remember that I would represent clients for minor traffic violations, and the judge would always say, well, I want you to come back next week and with an application for residency in the United States. And that was such a well-meaning request on the part of our judges, but in fact it was an impossibility to do that, because if you did that, then you'd put yourself in deportation proceedings, and those days, more than likely, you would be summarily deported. The same question extends as to the entry into the country in order to support the labor demands of the United States. The last time that I looked at the quota for individuals from Mexico, which represents the larger percentage of our undocumented population here in Columbus, was about 50,000 for the entire United States. But the labor demands were about 1 million a year. So that there was a disconnect, and also the reunification of families, let's not forget. So that presented a problem. It's not that the community is undocumented. It's that the community is undocumentable in the absence of change along the lines of comprehensive immigration reform.
And so what kind of situation does that cause? You know, you've got a lot of people, like you said, that you consider low-hanging fruit that may be in this situation. Are we going to see a lot of people taking sanctuary in churches, and are we going to, how fast do you think this is going to come about? I mean, is it fast and furious now?
I don't know. Here's what I have experienced just in the last month is that there's a growing conversation in the faith community to be willing to accept, to provide space, and to be supportive in this way. So, I mean, speaking from faith community, I see a growing capacity for sanctuary, and just in the last couple of days have talked to a pastor friend in Madison, Wisconsin, whose congregation is preparing for that, in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, whose congregation is preparing for that.
The other thing is in a way, I think sanctuary is an attempt of well-intentioned people to do something, and so I think that's worth something, right? That's worth a lot. But the other is, in Ramona Reyes, we had this conversation here right as we're coming in, is what does the community want? What do they want, right? And so I think that the community needs to understand, first of all, that it's an option. I think in general, because it's a relatively new option. And so I think that if we get too far ahead of where the community's at, then we have to be careful. It always has to be an option of well-intentioned people, right? Privileged people. But the community needs to see it as a viable option, not be threatened by it, and there's things that we have to work on what does that mean, because we don't live in fear, most of us. We don't know what that's like, most of us. Maybe differently we might, but not like that. And so it's important. That's kind of where we're in the whole aspect of any kind of organizing. You don't organize for people. You with people, right? And however well-intentioned or smart or academic you may be, always it has to be with the people. And so that's kind of what we're learning. I feel here in Columbus specifically, that gap has the potential to kind of come together a little bit more once we understand what it is. This is the first time we've done it here, and really in the state as a public case, right? And so we're learning as we go. But I think that back to kind of Edith again is she has felt that she wants to be with her family and not be deported, and she feels this is the best way that she's going to get what she wants. And I believe that as well. And obviously the Columbus Mennonite Church believes that as well, and many people do.
But I can imagine that it's got to be really difficult for Edith to be in a church. She can't leave to go to the grocery. She can't leave to go walk around the block. She can't go anywhere, interact, be in the community in any way. How's that playing out with her, even though she's, with her family a lot? How's it playing out not being able to go out and function as she has been?
Right, it's basically house arrest. It's not a pleasant form of existence. She has not been in the church very long. She came in for a couple days over the past Labor Day, and then because of an extension that she got legally, she went back home, and then now has been in since Monday evening. So, I mean, how do you maintain your mental health when you're in a building? It's one of the unknowns, but her being able to see her family is what she has chosen to be most important for her right now.
This is what she
Joe,
said.
I wanted to add. I wanted to actually respond to something that you said, Ruben, because I agree with Ruben. I think it's absolutely critical to see these cases from a personal standpoint. That we're talking about Edith Espinal, a human being, but there's another layer to this. And that is that the current immigration policies are in fact not just deporting individuals. When you deport a head of family, you're breaking up a family. And in the vast majority of these cases, if I were to use my clients as a sampling of the community, I would say in 90% of the cases, you're talking about American families. You're talking about families where, as in this case, we have 2 children who are American citizens. What are you supposed to do with that? And by the way, we have met that in our history twice. First time in 1931, where American citizens were actually deported as children with their families to Mexico, and again during the sadly named Operation Wetback in 1956. And in both of those instances, we had this kind of an experience of the breaking up of American family. And this may happen, but it's not going to be happening without pushback. And I would implore you to remember these stories and push back against the narrative that these are criminals. These are American families that are being broken apart by immigration policies that special interests have refused to consider for many, many years and are still blocked.
Ruben, did you have something you wanted to ask?
I was just going to say, what I've heard Edith say in interviews in the past week when asked that very question is she said, and to me it's like, wow, it just, I don't know. She said something like, she said consistently a few times, I was living that life with that ankle bracelet in my home, right? and knowing that any time that they could probably come in if they wanted to, because I have a deportation order. And so while I'm not at home, at the very least, I'm not far away from my family where I can't see them at all. At the very least, I'm in a place where my children can come and my family can come. And I get emotional because that's how we as a people, everyone, but specifically us, Latinos, Hispanics, that's how we've survived. That's how we came. I mean, that's the history of our country. And she's saying that in a very humble way, right? Except she's got an ankle bracelet on, right? And so for her to be able to say, like, yeah, I haven't heard her say at all yet, like, yeah, it's like boring here, or what is that, right? Or she's, I read. I've been reading. I've been doing some, and so to me, that's the power, if you will, of the sanctuary movement. And the other thing is that the sanctuary, what we realize is that sanctuary, we're creating sanctuary here. This is the sanctuary movement. The church is just where we're housing the person, right? And so the sanctuary movement is more than just a place, a physical place for people. It's creating a real opportunity city, if you will, or a real sanctuary city, if you will. That's what we want. That's what we're fighting for.
Okay, I want everyone in the audience to know that in a few minutes we're going to go to audience questions. So if you have a question you'd like to ask, don't be shy. The microphone is over there. Go over there and stand, and I will call on you and take your questions. And while you're doing that, though, I want to ask a question of you folks. So we've got this situation. Is there anything that you're talking about putting public pressure for change, but is there anything that the state, that local government can do that can in any way help the situation, in your opinion?
I think, in my opinion, as far as Edith's case, visibility and moral support is extraordinarily important. But as far as from a legal and effective legal strategy, there isn't really anything that can be done. We have always been saying, and it is true, that the immigration issue is the exclusive purview of the federal government. Remember, that was the litigation, the Supreme Court case in the United States versus Arizona, where Arizona was trying to advance immigration, draconian immigration measures against their own population. And the Obama administration challenged that successfully. So, okay, but this is what the other side of it looks like. So I don't think that there's anything that can be done. And I think, did you want to add something to that?
Let me add to it, because surely with, I don't know, 40, 50 people that are in here, the strategy now has moved from organizing around outside ICE to keep her home to reaching out to Senator Portman, Senator Brown, Governor Kasich, Representative Teaberry, Representative Beatty, Representative Stivers, those people that are from this area. And so I have to believe that somebody here has a connection to Senator Portman. We don't, I mean, we've been reached out by lots of groups, but we have to reach out to Senator Portman. We have to have him make a call to the Director of Department of Human Services, or to Homeland Security, excuse me, or to the President. Or someone has to know someone that's connected, has the ear of Governor Kasich, who's now making these statements that this is an immigrant welcoming Ohio, that DACA students. Well, that's great, but let's move on that, and we could start off by visiting Edith, right? She's not going anywhere. We'll go on his schedule or their schedule, right? And so inviting them to see Edith and having them make those calls, because that's where we're at. That's what has to be done. And please, I'll be here as long as I have. If you have any connection or any way to do that, I'm all ears. Now I want to move on that. We want to move on that.
So we can lobby.
Well, it's the CMC's tradition to take audience questions. So I see we have some folks back there who are interested in doing that, asking a question. So please step up and say your name and ask your question. And I would also say, in consideration of everyone, please stick to your question rather than making long editorial kind of comments. So Okay, first question, please.
Marion Harris, and I will say thank you so much for what you are all doing for Edith. My question is this. We have the church acting as a sanctuary where theoretically ICE is not going to come and break down the doors. What about sanctuary cities and the state of California? Governor Brown has just declared California as a sanctuary state. What's the legal standing for that? Does that mean someone living in California, if Edith was in California? I mean, I just wanted some clarification if you could.
Right. The term, while it's the same word, in fact, it's something that is applied differently. When you're talking about a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state, in effect, it's a decision made by the authorities in that state or that city that they're not going to act in the place of immigration agents. They're going to secure the safety of the community. They are going to make sure that everybody is well served, but at the same time, they're not going to pick up the phone every time that either law enforcement or a social service agency or a governmental agency comes across an individual. And that is what you're receiving the pushback, what you're seeing the pushback on the part of the Department of Justice. But that's all that it means. It doesn't mean that they can prevent federal authorities acting within that given state from going and grabbing somebody.
And I don't think this has been brought up yet, but the reason, one of the reasons the church or a faith congregation is a unique space anywhere in the country is that there was a 2011 internal ICE policy. The key phrase is sensitive locations, that ICE would not enter sensitive locations, and they were instructed, not to enter sensitive locations, which includes schools, hospitals, and churches. And so that what makes that's not a law, but it's a policy that's been followed to this point, and that is an added circle of protection at this point around churches. Doesn't mean that might change.
Okay, next question, please.
My name is Carol Looper, and my question is, in history, in cases similar to Edith's case, has ICE ever lost?
What do you mean by lose?
I mean, has anybody fought deportation in a case like this and not been deported?
Yes. As a matter of fact, there is a relatively long history of cases where the deportation order, or the order for removal, had been stayed for a long period of time, a long renewable period of time. But I will tell you that that those cases were a lot easier to find within the history, the years of the Obama administration. As far as between January forward, I am personally unaware. Maybe Ruben, who keeps track of these things, would know. So, Carol, I think that in the past, yes. I don't know about now.
I think that the strategy has been really to delay, and in hopes that something changes at the administrative capacity, at the top from the highest, right? And so we're constantly delaying. The strategy, to a great part, is to delay it, and then work on specific cases. And we have stopped deportations many times before, from that happening at that moment, right? And even we've been able to here locally get people out of the local detention centers, which are county jails. So it's those strategies of delaying. Ultimately, like I said, ultimately ICE wants to deport people. Ultimately, this country is not a welcoming country. So it's a bigger issue than just one particular case, than your question, I think. And so how do we work on it from a multi-level but not lose sight of that one person that right now happens to be Edith Espinal?
And just to clarify, I know this has been said in different ways, but Edith applied for asylum, safety from violence in her country of origin, Mexico. And so it is up to the whims of our immigration system to say, yes, our country is a place where you can receive asylum, or no, it is not a place you can receive asylum, we are now deporting you. And so just to make that clear, that there are whims of and personal discretion of judges, even though that discretion is now being almost exercised entirely as a no.
Okay. Next question.
I'm Laura Zimmerman, and I'm part of Columbus Mennonite Church, so you know that I support this. And maybe, Joel, you just answered part of my question. I have a cousin I recently I had a conversation with, this was in the paper, and he said, I'm not for this. This person came here illegally, and I have friends who are trying to get here legally and cannot. She was illegal. Now, I heard you say the word, Joe, I heard you say draconian, I heard you say undocumentable. I know I heard what you just said, Joel, but what does one say to one's cousin when he says she came here illegally?
I run into that very, very frequently. It's difficult to try to identify each and every case without maybe taking over the floor for about an hour and a half. May I suggest that at least with respect to the cases that I normally work with, which are usually Mexican immigrants, that the history of the United States and Mexico is extraordinarily complicated, predicated on the basic concept that in many instances Mexicans are not entering the United States, but the United States entered Mexico. 1/3 of the landmass of the United States was at one time part of the territory of the Republic of Mexico. And you know what, and there may be some historians in the room, I can't think of any other land that was conquered during the imperial wars of the 19th century that have not been returned to the people, whether it be in Africa and the Far East or any place else. But I will defer to people who perhaps have studied this more adequately. So you've got that complicating layer to begin with, and superimposed to that is the attempt to reunify families. Ruben was born in the United States, but I know that he has family in Mexico. And the desire, you know, I don't know if in the introduction it was mentioned, but I'm a refugee. I didn't see half of my family after we left Cuba for the United States. And this type of separation is a human tragedy. And when you have the phenomenon of two countries that are next to each other, of course you're going to have this kind of instinct. However, Lori, it's difficult to try to justify each and every of the 13 million cases that might be available. I'd like to focus on the reality that we have 13 million people here in the United States. And it would be cruel to rip apart the families that they were part of, as well as, even in individual cases, to throw the people out of the country. It's a spectacle that we as Americans, I believe, would find unacceptable. So I would focus, and I do focus, on the reality. Look, I'm not sure how it happened, but this is the reality right now. How do you expect to solve it?
Let me tell you what Edith says. Because there are two things that have moved me as I've interpreted for her last week or sat by her when she's been interviewed. Because she's been asked, that's always a question that people ask, right? And this is what she said, if I could. She said that doesn't bother me, that's always going to be there. And my focus is to be with my family. So she brings it back, right? My focus is to be with my family. And my fight is to be here in Columbus, Ohio. So she brings it back to kind of the core of it is keeping families together, of the breakup of a family, right? And I mean, how many of you have children or are children of someone, or have needs, all of us, right? And so that's something that we all understand, but we all define at our convenience, when it's convenient to us, for some of us perhaps. And so bringing it back to that, and I too have family that are friends that ask me the same thing, and to me that brings me down. And so my focus, and our focus, and Edith's focus is let's focus on those people who say, we want you here, but don't do it in a way but do it in a meaningful way, right? So our focus again is those. If this is a welcoming city, the mayor of Boston said this when he declared a sanctuary city, and it was powerful. He did a public a press conference and said, City Hall will be a safe space for you. City Hall is a sanctuary. We will protect you here if you. I'm like, wow. I mean, so he's created that. He said that, right? So how do we focus on making this a true sanctuary city? Because we have a true sanctuary space now. We know that. It's on Oak Park, right? Oakland Park Avenue, right? And so how do we become sanctuary people? How do we become a sanctuary city through the people? And the legislative part will happen, in part, to a great part, it's political. It is what it is. But there's power there, and we need their voices still. And so I'm with Edith. I'm going to focus on the family, on my family, on keeping my family together.
Okay. Next question, please.
I'm Jane Scott, and my name's Jane Scott. I have so many questions, some of which you've just all answered. I guess in a perfect world, if you were in Congress, what is the path for the 11 to 13 million, some undocumented and some frankly have entered illegally or have overstayed their visa and technically have broken the law of the United States in order to be here? And thank you for clarifying that, because Joel and I had a conversation. I was not clear that Edith was undocumented versus illegal, and I think that's a distinction that most of us don't understand and don't recognize.
So undocumented her.
Yes.
She was playing by the rules,
exactly.
And they said, we undocument you.
Exactly, and I understand that. So if you were Congress, if you were the leaders of Congress, how would you design or orchestrate the path to create a whole sea change of how the United States looks at this situation and frankly corrects this situation rather than continues to make it more and more complicated?
And Jane, I want to mention here that the word illegal is considered to be derisive within this community, and I think by the majority of Hispanic Latinos as well. But, there was a perfectly acceptable Senate bill that was introduced in 2007, and that was Kennedy-McCain, or McCain-Kennedy, if you would prefer. And that bill would have provided immediate change of status to anybody that would apply and that would not have illogical things, a bad criminal record and those kinds of things that you yourself could draft on a piece of paper here in 10 minutes. And there was a little bit of debate as to how soon those individuals might be able to have the path to citizenship. Do you remember? But what happened since then? Well, what happened since then is that we had one major network since 2006 that has dedicated itself almost exclusively to talk about how bad immigrants are. So that in 2006, 64%, this is an actual figure, 64% of self-described conservative Republicans were in favor of immigration reform with the path to citizenship. But since that time, because of the propaganda that we have heard, culminating in the statement about people being criminals and rapists and drug dealers, we've had a cultural shift, in my opinion, as a consequence of propaganda. So we've had good bills, and then you had also the attempt by Marco Rubio and exclusively Republican senators after President Obama's reelection to attempt to do this, and for the same exact reason. It failed to gain critical support on the part of the Republicans. So that's where we are.
First of all, I wouldn't be a congressperson, and second of all, I believe that the true True change, and this is not even, this is so, I mean, oversaid, but true change has come from us, from the people. President Obama did not give us DACA. Dreamers fought for that, forced him to sign it, right? Forced him after he denied. And we sat on his offices, and then he did it, right? And so our emphasis, and I'm speaking from my perspective as an organizer and a believer in people, is that we have to come to the point that the constantly are saying that's not enough, or that's not it, or a DREAM Act with a border secure wall is not going to cut it for us. Whatever it is that we constantly have to be pushing, right? And so while I understand that legislation policy working inside the system is needed, right? And maybe there's got to be drastic change there as well. So it's much more complex than just being a congressperson, because we know that reform is reform, constantly being reformed, right? And changes. And so how do we build power within ourselves through Edith, through her family, through her sons, through Mo, who's here, through all of us, Ramona, and I'm not to name just the Latinos, but other people, right? And so how do we build power through ourselves and truly making this a sanctuary city? And how do we do it right now and help Edith in that perspective? And again, I'm going to ask you again. We need to get to the governor. It's not far from here, his office. The mayor's not far from here. The county commissioners, right? Have them visit, have them see Edith's face. Have them, somebody has to have a connection, right? To be able somehow to make that connection so it not be like, I don't know, Carol Looper said, or someone said, ultimately someone's deported or gone because they win, right? And so the fight has got to continue. It's hard. It's difficult. I'm tired. Yesterday I came home at 5 o'clock and I fell asleep and I woke up at 10. I was just like, my body it's tiring. And you all know, because some of you, I know you do the same kind of stuff. And so, but we have to keep involving people. We have to keep moving. And to me, we have to create a sanctuary within ourselves first, and then we do it.
Well, that'll have to be the end of it, because we're running out of time here. I'll turn it back over to Mindy.
Wow, this has been a really powerful forum today. I know I have a lot to think about. You can view and share today's forum and all of our forums on CTV Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS public affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. So let's thank our speakers, Joel Miller, Ruben Castilla Herrera, Joseph Moss, and Joe Ingalls. And thanks to all of you for being here. We look forward to seeing you back soon.